So, for a brief background, apart from my personal experience, because I've also executed a terrible performance in my first recital, it's also inspired from the perspective that I have learned from the protagonist in a K-drama entitled 2521. I like how she views competitions because she thinks that this merely serves as an indicator of her progress, not her value as a person, but rather an evaluation about how she outplayed her past self. All the anxiety, being uncomfortable, embarrassments, she embraces all of it rather than by fearing them. And that's it. To be honest, this is my first time also to be involved in creative writing, thus my beginner layout and style. For the first question, is the story's flow good or any part that made you stop reading to understand what's going on?
Okay, so I'll start. So to answer your question, I would say that the story flowed smoothly. It was very easy to digest, generally speaking. Although the first page, I kind of stumbled a little bit because there was like a lot going on in the first page, a lot of like metaphors. But after that, it was smooth sailing for me. And it was so smooth and easy to understand that it's almost like it's for younger readers, like young adult or yeah, young adult, adolescents. Not sure if children, but definitely younger audience. Because I think it's also, I mean, the story itself, I think, is something a lot of younger people go through or can easily relate with. Um,
Yes,
and
I yes, I actually intended it for younger audience or for
okay, okay.
children, and that is very spot on. Thank you.
So yeah, okay, so that's good because I was able to pick up on that. And yeah, the way you tell the story, because I think usually stories for younger readers, they have like a moral. Um, and I don't really see that here, but at the same time, the ending can be I mean, I like how it ends. I think the ending is open to interpretation, and I think that's something younger readers would appreciate. Um, so yeah, it's like it's yeah. I'll just leave it there for now.
I actually intended it to be an open ending. In the first, I want to include a moral, but I want them to interpret and think how the story will be means to them, and that's it.
Yeah, I got that. So thanks, Ian.
Um, thanks also. Any more?
I guess I'd like to comment that I actually kind of noticed the 2521 reference, like how Nahido felt that stale or like you mentioned here the stagnant movement of his development. I actually realized that it sounds familiar, like I've watched this before or I've seen this before. And then when you mentioned 2521, it's like, okay, that's where it's from. And I actually kind of get the narrative of um how others could keep on improving, like how Nahido is still developing while Koyurim, like all that shit. I actually understood that narrative from the story, and I really like how the ending is supposed to um, make you think of what would happen next instead of letting the readers have a thought of what is happening. So yeah, that's all I think.
Oh, thank you. Any more? Or should I move on to the second question?
Um, I so the question is, um, was the story flow good? I actually got confused with what was going on, but funnily, I mean, I okay. So it's weird because I knew what was go happening in a general sense, even if I couldn't really grasp um, these specifics, um, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if it has to do with the metaphors, because there's a lot of metaphors, um, or is it because, well, yeah, well, or are we, or is it because we're talking about, or the narration is a specific point in time, or are we talking about just a general description of this person's like attitude? So I wasn't really sure. Um, I wasn't really sure of the specifics, but funnily enough, I could get the flow, and it's simple enough to understand, even if I didn't get the specifics. Yeah.
I think that my use of metaphors is kind of disrupts how the flow, how clear is it to be understand. And noted, thank you. I will move on to the second question.
Sure.
What is your interpretation? Do you think I clearly lay out um the main moral of the story, or your the main interpretation that you um
Well, um, okay, I'll go first again. Um, so I don't know the 25-21 reference, so I really just have this story as my basis. Um, not that it's, not that it's like a bad thing. But anyway, I'm just saying I don't know like any reference, so I might have a different reading. But anyway, so my interpretation of the story is that there's a violinist who is traumatized by his first recital. And because of that, he refuses to participate in recitals or any public performance again. And it sounds like he doesn't practice anymore. And I mean, at the very end, he seems like he regrets not practicing. After that long time of the trauma, he regrets not practicing. But when he decides to practice again, yeah, he realizes he sucks and then he regrets it more. Um, and for me, the ending, there's that open-endedness of, because he said that he sounds like a beginner and he realizes he sounds like a beginner. So I like that the ending is open in a way that there's a question of, will he start practicing more because he accepts that he's a beginner, and if he wants to be better, he would have to keep practicing? Or will the cycle continue of, I hate how I sound, therefore I will just quit or not practice? So I like that open-endedness, um, because I think the young readers who will relate to this, you give them that option of, okay, so for me, do I want to practice now? Or of course, them relating to the main character might make them realize that um, what they're going through is normal. And practicing is really a part of getting better. And that also means, sounding bad. So yeah, that's what I got.
yes. Also from a side not practicing, I intended it not because the competitions, as I have said earlier, that competition serves as an indicator of the progress wherein he can get feedbacks from his instructor, although harsh, but it will help him to be better. So I think that by not also getting into that competition and that practice because um, he is discouraged, he also loses the chance to be better at evaluating his strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, it's also up to him what he will do now that he was compared to the skills that they have to his other violinists, he was a beginner that can be called up for opportunity because of his beginner skills. Any more?
Hey, yeah, I can go.
Yes.
Hi, sorry for being late also. Thanks so much for sharing your story. For me, I guess just to start, I'd like to, um, I guess, follow from what Steph mentioned about picking up on the story having a form of a fairy tale of sorts. And you did mention in the beginning of the question, you're asking what the moral of the story was. So yeah, in the beginning, so now that you established that there is supposed to be a moral in the story, that really helps because not all stories have to have one, right? So that is changing how I see the story now. Um, I feel like it's hard for me to find an interpretation for the ending except for a literal reading of it. I think there's some information that I'd like to have seen more. There's a scene where you describe the violin at the end, no, of the competition as I think you said it was dusty and abandoned. So I'm thinking, so he never practices for the recital, right? So like, is he self-sabotaging or something like that? So
Yes.
in the last line, you wrote it was the second time that he felt like a beginner. The first time, like the others have said, no, is when he feels performance anxiety. So I got that. So the second time that he's feeling a beginner is um at the end when because he hasn't practiced right at this point. So when I'm reading it, it's hard for me to read it except literally like he didn't practice so he feels like a beginner again. But I do feel like you're trying to say something with the last line, and I do see it could be very powerful for me. You were saying something earlier about how it could be a chance for him to start again, if I'm not mistaken. So starting anew, there's this feeling of anything can happen right now. It's up to him what happens next. So if that is what your intention was, for me it wasn't super clear yet. But yeah, you could we're on our way to something, I would say.
Mm.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you. For the second beginner, I intended to be compared with other violinists currently at his level because at the first beginner it was a starting period, but on the second beginner I intended it to be with other violinists at his level. So that's it. Thank you so much.
So what I picked up on was actually the instructor who seems to be like an important person, the other important person or character in the story.
Yes.
Um, After the first performance where the violinist bombed, it was the unsympathetic feedback. I think perhaps that is kind of a big deal. Uh, and then and it's followed up later on because the professor, I assume that's the same instructor, said basically said that he's not going to be chosen. So I was kind of that's the what I picked up on. And was there any moral, or was there any moral to this? I'm not really sure. Um, some things that uh, other questions that I had, I guess how. So the other question I had was this: is this a recite? Is the issue just a recital, or is the issue that the person doesn't know how to play that well? And we don't establish like a baseline skill level of how good this person is. And when we get to the end where it says, so my I actually just assumed that he was never really good to begin with because it didn't say anything about him being good. So I just assumed he wasn't good. um, and so when he said he was a beginner all over again, that's I just thought he was his second time to be a beginner. I just thought he was just he was a beginner, and he is still a beginner, and didn't really improve on anything actually.
Yes, I think for the story it's the person's issue about how she about how he overcome his anxiety. By practicing, I think it's meant for that he less practice than his other violinist, supposedly to be his downfall for not to be chosen. And that's it. Should I move on to the third question?
Yeah, I think you can because I think it'll connect with like all the other comments.
Okay, thank you. Um, what do you think are the parts in which the story may felt lacking or rush?
So Raphael and I already mentioned like the first page was kind of difficult for us because there were a lot of metaphors. So I think what would clean the first page up is being specific about the situation. So for example, um what exactly happened at the first recital? What was he supposed to play? Like what song? Um, what I don't know, maybe what arm movements, things like that. More specific stuff, and I think that would help reveal his skill level. So I mean, if you've been to violin recitals, kids would usually just play "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." That's the recital song. But if if um, if they're let's say they're 14 years old and it's their first time learning the violin and it's their first recital, it would be some like Mozart, super easy Mozart piece, something like that. So I think giving the song would really help readers have a gauge, and they could also imagine the types of mistakes that would make your character cringe and maybe make the audience and the instructor cringe because I mean mistakes on the violin sound really bad because they're screechy. So yeah, I think those more vivid details will really help instead of say just saying, you know, like shaky movements, Great Depression, like those things. Um so that's one for me. Another thing, this is quite minor. So Raphael said earlier that um, there are parts that are not specific, but somehow the story works. And I think the general vibe of it works because people know what the or people have a feel of what the story is about. And I think um, you got too specific when you mentioned Joe Hisaishi. Because the moment you mentioned Joe Hisaishi, um, suddenly the readers might think, oh, so is this now set in Japan? Because Joe Hisaishi is in Japan. Does this mean it's set in, you know, in our era? Because Joe Hisaishi is he still alive, right? But yeah, like there's you put immediately a time and place because you mentioned Joe Hisaishi, and suddenly the question is also like, are the violin parts now accurate to maybe like music school in Japan? So a lot of questions are suddenly raised because you mentioned him, and I was wondering if you could um just make it more general but still specific, like saying um you know, a composer of like one of the, I don't know, trendy movies now, like a composer of your main character's like favorite film or anime or video game. So it's like specific to his interest, but it won't, you know, put a time and place to the piece. um and then sorry, the next thing that I have is I wonder also if we could establish um if he likes music, because I'm not sure if he is passionate about playing the violin. And I think that would affect how people would think of the story and your character. I don't know if this would tie in with what Andy is saying, but somehow him being passionate about violin or not passionate about violin would um tie in with, why is the violin case dusty, right? So I feel like it would be more heartbreaking if he loves playing the violin but is afraid to play the violin because of his trauma from the recital. Or is it like he doesn't really like playing violin at all, so it doesn't really matter? So yeah, there is that nuance. And if it's, if he really likes playing the violin, I feel like we need to also feel it. I'm not sure how you will do that, but maybe you could just say it because you're writing in the omniscient point of view. But I feel like I need to see that his relationship with violin beyond, performing in front of other people, beyond expectations of his professor or instructor. So I'll leave it there first.
So many things to improve on. Thank you. For the mastery level, I think I should indicate that they are studying in university level, like conservatory for college. So that may establish her his competency of his skill, but when the but when he experienced the recital, he suddenly gets demotivated and disencouraged. So thank you. I have learned so much. Any more?
Can I also say or ask something? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
sure. Yeah, sure.
Uh, this is also actually one of my problems in my own. This is actually also my dilemma. Um, in terms, I this the story is very focused on a specific character, right? And
Yes.
can I ask what's the overall emotion or of the character? Like, is he sad, remorseful? What's his overall emotion all throughout?
I think after his first recital, he gets bitter. He gets bitter at those people who are voluntarily signing up for the competitions because he thinks that these people will also be embarrassed, something like that. He compares that his experience of first recital will also happen to other um, um, musicians that will volunteer for the recital, but at the end he kind of regrets it about that he should push and overcome his anxiety and fear, that to overcome his fear to be vulnerable and some kind of like that.
I see. Um, it's in my own personal opinion, and again, this is also my problem with my own writing. Uh, it would help maybe if uh the the character's motivations are amplified more. Like I don't know, there are more what explanations or maybe expositions of why the character wants to do such thing or why a character would go to such length to do such thing, so that the
Mm.
audience may able to feel in a much more deeper sense the character itself, you know. I don't know, it's just a personal opinion. I hope it helps.
Mhm. Yes,
I also have
you
a
can.
question.
Yes.
It might tie in with Marx's question, um, like about, like motivation and stuff like that. And I wonder, so yeah, I'll just ask you first. What made you decide that your violinist is already, um, you know, in university in a conservatory of music? Why that age and not a teenager who is, you know, who wants to learn violin, or is like dabbling in like different hobbies. So why university?
It is university because um they will be kinda accustomed to the recital routines. They will always be tested, something like that. According to the universities required to be that they should be for that they should be for perform something like that. That it is not a matter of um just spares of their motivation, but recitals is actually should be traditional because it is a music school, so everyone should be at least um perform on something like that. um yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So I don't know anyone here. Oh, Isabel. Oh, she's gone. Because Isabel said she studied music, so I'm not sure if that's like a studied music in college. But okay, so my question now, is that possible to be to be a music major, but you don't practice the violin to the point that the violin case is dusty? Because that's what confused me about the story. Like I wasn't sure anymore if this was a student, because I feel like if you're a music major you have to practice whether or not you like it. So yeah, it felt like a loophole for me, unless you have an explanation for that, because yeah, I didn't study music.
I think it's kind of a loophole because I just want to indicate how he gets discouraged to practice more. So yes, it's kind of loophole.
I, f- I feel like if the recital thing matters, I think they could just go to a music school, like I don't know, Yamaha or something. Like because if it, well, maybe you would also know because you said you're also a musician. Um like they would have recitals also quite frequently for the students, because I mean their parents kind of paid for it. So I think if it's even if it's just like your casual music school, and then again the whole practicing isn't gonna fit also. Okay, you'll have to like try to fix that
Um,
before.
in music schools, recitals are actually required, but in this story, I just made it to be voluntarily, so they have the option to be to showcase how their progress or to run away from being vulnerable.
Yeah, no, I get that. But I guess my concern is if it's a music school like in college and he's a music student, I don't think there's a possibility for him to not touch his violin case to the point that it gets really dusty. Like it doesn't, like there's no way that's going to happen, because I would imagine like every week you'd be playing.
Yeah, it's kind of loophole, but it can be associated with this care routine because sometimes when I don't play for sometimes days or even weeks, my instrument case gets also dusty if it's placed with some like farthest corner or some in air that can be penetrated by light.
I want to add in some idea. Um, I don't know a lot about violin, but I heard that you need to like take care of the strings a lot, right?
Yes.
Maybe you could, make it like he didn't like to take care his violin anymore. He still played, but he
Mm.
didn't take care of the strings because he didn't play it a lot. He avoided it
Mm.
as much as possible.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, I can't confirm, but that makes
I,
sense.
sh-
That fixes the dusty case.
I should really indicate the specifics what gets dusty.
Yeah, it could be the strings, but maybe it could also be the bow. I think the bow also has to do with like the tension, right, of the horsehair. So I don't know if like the bow gets like super loose or something, but maybe would be those would make more sense. I'm not sure.
Yes, they can be loose out also.
Can I
Mm.
ask if there was an already pre-existing backstory to your character? Like, was he a prodigy at some point? That's why he continued playing the violin, and then when he got overconfident or something like that. Because if it's in the 25-21 reference, just like Nahito, she was a prodigy at fencing, but then she had like this block, this athletic block that prevented her from like developing more or something,
Mm.
you know. Like what's
Mm.
I this is what I don't know who asked this before, but what was the driving force on why they continued playing the violin or something like that? His backstory especially.
I I haven't thought of that backstory. I just begin at the experience of his first recital, so I do not form some kind like of that.
I think it would help if like you knew what initiated that passion in the first
Mm.
place, like what made them motivated in playing the violin and what broke them into like having that dusty violin at the corner. I get that he got discouraged, but if he went into that college, like that conservatory, he has to practice like all the time, like every week, once a day or something like that. Yeah.
Noted.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, that's a really good point, Tamahiro. And like he can't be a beginner, right? Like he has to be good because these music schools they also have an audition process. You can only be a music major if you're good enough. Like you
Yes.
can't, yeah, right. Like you can't be a noob. So I think establishing that would help. Regarding the backstory comment of Hamahiru, and I guess it would show that he really loved violin to begin with, right? To choose it as a major and I don't know, eventually be a you know concert violinist, something like that. Um, so yeah, I think you probably need to specify that.
Yes. Thank you. For the last question, general areas to improve on. What do you think are the areas that I should need to exercise more in terms of the style like that?
I think in terms of like writing style, it's okay for me because I do like that it's easy to digest, and given that it's for um, a young reader, it works. So it's for me just a matter of specifying, um, yeah, just the details. Um, yeah, more on the backstory probably of the character, his relationship with music. Why does this matter to him? Yeah, that's for me.
Establishing whys and hows. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go. I have a problem with the style. I found a lot of the words that you chose didn't fit exactly sort of I perhaps what you're trying to say. So there sometimes the words that you're picking that don't exactly fit, and it is a little bit confusing sometimes. So, for example, an unexpected tribe of scapegoats voluntary that's just one example, and there are a few others. For example, and I guess this goes into the whole the metaphor critique that keeps on coming up. My suggestion, this is a broad suggestion, and it sounds like you have a really good idea in your head of what this character, who this character is, and like just hearing you explain it to us, and it's like you have an answer to all of our questions, and yet none of those things came out in the piece. So my suggestion would be you already have a good idea of this character, and I think you should focus less on the style, focus less on the metaphors, and perhaps be more literal in your narration. Um, as you can see, there's so many things people are so curious about who this person is, what his motivations are, um, what what this traumatic event, what exactly was it that happened, right? Um,
Mm.
and then so you have all of these details, and then you have to make sure that when it comes together in the narrative, it sort of makes sense. Like there are these loophole questions that a lot of people here have, which is how could it be that how could it be that you're a music student, but you've only ever done one recital in your life, and that was your very first one. So uh, yeah, it kind of has to make sense with the narrative, right?
Thank you. So many points that I should have improved on. Any more?
For me, yeah. I'll combine my answers to this also with my feedback from the previous question. They're kind of the same, if that's okay. Um,
Yes.
I love the feedback earlier about adding more vividness because when you mention, this is a children's story or at least aimed for children slash a fairy tale of sorts. I think what's really great about those types of stories is you can be very indulgent with metaphor and image, right? And the good thing about these is they can speak for themselves. So you don't have to worry about literally telling people, the persona's backstory, for example. So if he's a prodigy, like if you decide, for example, let's say he's a prodigy, a child prodigy, you could talk about and use images of, I don't know, like a rack of medals that he got when he was young. For example, that was it's dusty now or something like that. Kasi for a story na, you call it shaky bow, I think it was mentioned earlier then there's not a lot of sound in the story, which I think is a shame. You could use a lot of really good emotion inducing feelings using sound, no, and the sound descriptions, which isn't to say that you have to use a lot, because especially for a story of this length, there's one image you use in the beginning that I kind of stumbled on. You used the Great Depression to describe, if I'm not mistaken, musical recitals, and then you didn't explain why later on. So that was a bit that metaphor confused me for a bit. And then you have this really good metaphor later on. You wrote something about the trying to look for the sentence, wishing his existence should have never been written. So that evokes for me, an image of sheet music, of that of him being written, like, by somebody else. So there's like a lack of agency and choice on the part of the protagonist. And I thought that was an interesting image, and I wish it was explored more. So so much things that you could do. No, you can and you also bring up like a couple of images later on, like improvisation, notes being off key, and it never really finishes cohesively into a conversation. Um, so for me, I think if I could summarize what I'm trying to say, um, if you could think about what singular image you think is the most important, because thinking of like a lot of images will make it clunky, especially for this length, diba? So if it's shaky bow, I don't know, maybe you could go with vibrations or tension, I don't know, the smell of the auditorium during the competition, something like that. Because it could be very powerful, especially with the last paragraph, like your last sentence. Um, so yeah, the beauty of Flash kasi is like, I think somebody described it as you walking in a dark street and then you see a firework and you watch the fireworks spark and slowly fade. And that's the story. That's Flash. So by the end of the story, what feeling do you want to leave the reader, regardless of whether or not we got the details right or his background right? And tie it in with the image that you want to use for Shaky Bow. I think it could be you can really elevate this story. That's it.
Thank you so much. Hmm, I learned more. That's all for my questions.
All right.
Yay!
Thanks, Iya.
Thank you.
Yay. Good job.
Good job.
Congratulations.
Whoa.
I just want to thank all of you because I have learned so much. I get a lot of insights about the generals and the specifics on what I can improve more, and this motivates me um
Yay.
to be better. I like this environment because although I'm a beginner, it makes me so engaging to listen and to take what points you have raised. So thank you very much to all of you who attend this session and give insights. Thank you so much.